Hi, welcome to Talking Sunday Readings. My name is Ann Carter. I am joined, as always, by Pastor Richard Sadler and by Tim Carter, and we are discussing the readings chosen for we're getting to the end of Epiphany now. We are at the Transfiguration Sunday, which is the end of the season of Epiphany, and next week we will be in the Lenten season. It is traditional to have this reading at this time. And those readings are, we're taking the Old Testament reading from Deuteronomy chapter 34. We're also studying Hebrews chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. And then the gospel is from Luke chapter 9, verses 28 to 36.
A reading from Deuteronomy. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo, from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel.
The first reading from Deuteronomy is the death of Moses. Moses, of course, was the great prophet who led the children of Israel out of Egypt. He had met God at the burning bush. He had met God on the Mount Sinai. He talked face to face with God. He was a very important, big guy. And with that introduction, Tim, what questions do you have?
Well, this reading talks a whole bunch about, and it goes into quite a bit of detail about where exactly Moses was and what all he could see. It says he climbed the top of Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the tops of Pisgah across from Jericho, and it showed him all this stuff. And I'm wondering, where is Moab? Where's Nebo? Where is Pisgah? Am I saying that right? I feel like that's when you got to be careful how you say it. And then it also talks about the burial of Moses. And what do we know about his burial, and what traditions are there regarding his burial? Yeah. Those two are the big ones. Take them in whatever order you'd like to address those.
Well, I have a map that may be helpful here that identifies a lot of these places. And if you want to look, can you see the map now?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Here is Mount Nebo. It's in modern day Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
It's right across from Jericho. See, Jericho is right here. And down here is it's covered by Reuben and Gad, but there's Moab is this area right here. You see Moab, it comes up here. And then if you want to read through the text where it says all the things he'll be able to see, I'll point to them on this map while you read it, okay? So that'd be starting in verse, probably the end of verse.
The end of verse 1, I think, from
Yeah,
Gilead
right.
to Dan.
He's opposite Jericho on Mount Nebo, kind of generally. Now, what does he see?
There the Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan.
Okay. Gilead is covered by Gad and Manasseh, and then Dan is all the way up here. Go ahead.
All of Naphtali, the
That's
territory
right
of okay,
Yeah,
the
go
territory
ahead.
of Ephraim and Manasseh.
Okay, there's Ephraim, and Manasseh was on both sides of the Jordan River. Half Manasseh here, half Manasseh there. Keep going.
All the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea.
Right here, yeah.
Wow.
And
The Negev and
the
the whole.
Negev, the Negev is the desert area in the south. Okay, so that kind of duplicates the area of Judah. Okay,
And the whole region from the valley of Jericho.
that would be here. Okay, and as far as
It says the city of palms as far as Zoar.
And then so it goes from Jericho, and then he could see Zoar down here at this end.
Yeah.
And I've been on Mount Nebo, and it's amazing. You can see across to the Mediterranean Sea on a clear day. The day we were there, it was kind of hazy because of the heat.
Yeah.
So, but this is very doable for Moses to see all these regions. So, and they say his eye had not dimmed at this point when he dies. So he had 20/20 vision. He could see all this stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where I'm going to stop sharing then.
Well, then my follow-up question was about it talks about the burial of Moses. And it sounds like God buried him himself. And I'm wondering, why did God do it himself? And also, why bury him, and why not just take him up like we've heard about a few other people in the past? So what do we know about the burial of Moses?
Well, I think intentionally God kept us from knowing a whole lot because he knew that people's inclination was to erect shrines and altars at significant places in memory of significant people. And the children of Israel do this all through their history. They commit idolatry. And so to protect them from themselves, I think God says, okay, I'm just going to keep this a secret. I'll bury Moses and nobody will know. And it says that very explicitly in the text. Nobody knows where he was born. So they couldn't go back there year after year and commit all kinds of idolatrous ceremonies that God had not required of them. So we really don't know a whole lot about how God did it and so forth. But it'll be important when we get to the gospel lesson on the Transfiguration, because he appears to Jesus.
Yeah.
So does that mean that God gave him an early resurrection body that will now last forever, or was it a spiritual being that had a kind of a corporal appearance? There are some people who take Jude's reference to the argument that Michael has with the devil over the body of Moses, and they assume from that, they infer from that God gave Moses an early resurrection. And that's why he was able to talk with Jesus, because Elijah was alive, obviously. And we'll talk about that when we get to that gospel. But that's all speculation. We just don't have a lot of scriptural evidence that says for sure. But you may hear that from time to time.
Interesting. It's all interesting. People's curiosity or people's need to know fills in the blanks that perhaps they shouldn't do that, because we just don't know. We don't know what happened to the body of Moses, and God had his reasons. So why don't we just trust that? But that's neither here nor there.
What do you think is the importance that it mentions his eye was undimmed at 120 years old when he dies, and his vigor unabated? Why does he feel the need to tell us that? Is that to say that God had not permitted him to wear out, and that God just simply said, okay, now's the time for me to take you. Your times are in my hands. But God had kept him strong and healthy up right until his death day. What's the significance of that, you think, that we should look for?
Anybody who has been in the presence of God, I think that does something to your physical being. that you are somehow preserved. I mean, on the opposite end, there are those who tried to be in God's presence and they got killed. But Moses somehow trusted God implicitly, and being in that presence somehow preserved him. He had to stay strong and healthy because, my goodness, the children of Israel were certainly challenged to try to wrangle together and keep going down the road. But then when it was time, God said, it's time, and your body isn't worn out, but I'm calling you home. That's all I can think of. Yeah, what is, because also referenced is that the shoes of the children of Israel didn't wear out. For 40 years, they wandered around the desert and their shoes didn't wear out. There was something protective about the hand of God over these people as they became his people out in the desert.
I think it's reading a very good emphasis, I think, that you'll see in the text, that God is the one who sustained them and sustained Moses for this entire duration. And it ends in verse 10 with, there has not arisen another prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And then in Deuteronomy 18, Moses himself will say, the Lord will raise up another prophet like unto me. And that is a prophecy of Jesus. And then Jesus is the embodiment of God in the flesh. Yeah.
I think that's a good segue into Hebrews, where there's a comparison between Moses and Jesus.
A reading from Hebrews. Therefore, holy brothers and sisters who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, whom we acknowledge as our apostle and high priest. He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, bearing witness to what would be spoken by God in the future. But Christ is faithful as the Son of God's house, and we are his house, if indeed we hold firmly to our confidence in the hope in which we glory.
Jesus, he was faithful to the one in all God's house. Jesus was found worthy of greater honor than Moses. Moses was faithful as a servant. Jesus was faithful as a son over God's whole house. So as important as Moses was, Jesus is higher, is more, was chosen for, while Moses' job was hard, Jesus' job was downright awful in some ways. So
Well,
that's my comment.
And in this section, it says that Jesus was the first apostle. It says, consider Jesus the apostle and high priest of our confession. And an apostle is one who is sent out. So he's going to send out apostles himself, but he was God's apostle to the world to create more apostles. And that's not something that is said about Moses, but is definitely said about Jesus. And toward the end of this reading is another little reminder that Christ is faithful over God's house, and we are his house. So it uses that word twice. And it reminds us that the word house, as used in the Old Testament, often doesn't refer to a place or a building. It refers to a family, the house of David, the house of God. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We end up Psalm 23 saying, and it's not talking about a place, it's talking about you will forever be in the family of God. And so Jesus is a reminder, or this text reminds us that Jesus is the one who made that possible. It's just a very short reading, but full of some important words about Jesus.
Tim, any other questions, or shall we move into the gospel of the Transfiguration?
Yeah, we can move right ahead. Move right on.
The Holy Gospel according to Luke. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John and James with him, and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud, saying, "This is my Son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen.
One thing that frustrates me a little bit about the church year is that we've been moving along, right along with Jesus in his story chronologically, but then we kind of jump ahead because it needs to fit into the church year. And is it next Sunday or the Sunday after we're going to jump back to get to the temptation of Christ? Why didn't we just go in order? Well, I don't know. I didn't make it up. So we're at Luke 9, and this is the middle of Jesus' ministry, and he goes up on this mountain. And Dick, do you have a map again to show us where exactly this is going on?
Well, I can't say exactly where it's going on, but I can suggest a possibility, okay? And so let's use this PowerPoint as a way of getting there. Here's a map of Israel, and here's Jerusalem, and then way at the northernmost point is Caesarea Philippi, and there's Mount Hermon, the highest mountain in Israel. And a lot of people will take you to Mount Tabor and say that was the place of the Transfiguration. But the next story in the Gospels is Jesus coming to Caesarea Philippi. And so that would be a much more logical place. And it says a high mountain. And so Mount Hermon is the highest one of them all. And that's where they still ski and have snow on the top of the mountain most of the year. So I think there's a very, very good possibility that Jesus is in this region when the Transfiguration takes place. That's just a guess. I can't prove it because it doesn't say that. But the association with Caesarea Philippi in the next story, I think, strongly suggests that.
So they climb this mountain, Jesus leading the way, I think. Yeah, because Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him, and they went up to the mountain to pray. And while they're praying, while Jesus is praying, he changes. And the last time we hear about someone's face changing, we were talking about Moses, because when Moses was in the presence of God, and then he came down to talk to the people, his face was glowing and the people couldn't even look at him. So Moses had to wear a veil after that when he talked to the children of Israel. So somehow there's this glorification, it says they appeared in glory, Elijah and Moses. Question I've always had is, and I've asked it here before, how did they know it was Moses and Elijah? How do you tell? Did they have signs? Did they hear them talking so they could get the gist from the conversation? I don't know. Because they were speaking to Jesus about his departure, and which Jesus was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. So they know what's going to happen. Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem and he is going to be killed. And then Peter, James, and John, Peter decides to start talking, and this cloud covers them all, and then a voice comes out of the cloud, and then it disappears and it's all over. It's kind of crazy, the whole story. Tim, what do you think about it?
Well, there are a couple of very interesting, I guess, human moments in here that struck me as odd. And I guess actually thinking about it now, this is the second time, or this is the first of 2 times that I can think of where they all go off to pray, and the disciples fall asleep on Jesus.
Mhm.
Which, were they just praying for a really long time? Was prayer different that they could fall asleep during it? Because they're up on a mountain and they're taking a nap. It just struck me as odd. So if you have any thoughts about that, I'd like to hear. But then there's also this, mine even has a parentheses around it where it says, Peter says, Master, let's build some shelters for you and Moses and Elijah. And mine says in parentheses, he did not know what he was saying, which strikes me as a very odd editorial comment that is not free. That's not in most of the Gospels. So I'm wondering why did they include that? Yeah, why would they include that? That just seems like an odd, I don't know if somebody was being snide or if it's why include that that little commentary on Peter's state of mind?
Well, in the context of Middle Eastern hospitality, he's doing a really hospitable thing. He's saying to Jesus, we ought to provide shelter for you three guys. We don't have to take care of ourselves, but we got to take care of you because you're the important ones up here. And the point of Jesus' ministry was not to stay up on a mountain peak, but to get down in the valley of the shadow of death and to die. And you'll notice that the dynamic from here on in is from the Mount of Transfiguration. He had his face set for Jerusalem. And so that may be why, in answer to Anne's first question about why is this making us jump back and forth in Luke, that may be why they're setting us up for the whole Lenten season with this story and saying, okay, folks, look for this thematically, even though it might bounce you around in the text, but he's on his way to die. And he starts out with the next text we're going to hear in the Gospels is his temptation. And so he takes on the devil right away, but continues to take on the devil all through his ministry and on the cross. So that may be part of what's being focused on here. But to your first question about and the reason that may have been they may have said he didn't know what he was talking about is that he was trying to keep Jesus up there, and that was not the will of the Father. The will of the Father was that he had to go down the hill, get back and head toward Jerusalem. Maybe that's why Luke says that. Anne, have you run across any other ideas as to why he makes the rather critical comment?
I have read that sometimes these kind of comments denote an eyewitness retelling of it. And then Peter said to whoever was writing down the story, Luke, or if Luke wrote down the oral tradition, Peter says, I said that I didn't even know what I was talking about. Now that I think back on it, this was an extraordinary event. Moses and Elijah were there, and I said, let's build them a tent. What was I thinking? That's just a conjecture of why it was included. It is an interesting, humanizing comment to make that these guys who were with God, it took a long, how do you know what's going on around you when something like this happens to you?
Well, and the Transfiguration is one of the rare moments when we see the full divine glory of Jesus shining through. And that's why I think it's matched with readings in the Old Testament from the life of Moses, because he is now the new prophet. But he is on a mountain, and at Mount Sinai, it was a dark cloud that overshadowed the mountain. This one, Matthew tells us, is a bright cloud. And Luke, I love Luke's origin because of the detail that he gives us. He says, Moses and what were they talking about? Moses and Elijah were talking about his exodus, and that's the word that's used in the Greek text. And Moses obviously was familiar with an exodus because he had made it himself with the children of Israel. And Elijah had made an exodus out of life and directly into heaven in a whirlwind. So they are preparing him for his exodus from life, his death, and his resurrection by talking about him, preparing him for that. And so that's a great insight that we don't get in the other gospel accounts of the Transfiguration. And what's interesting too is they are afraid and terrified And when the cloud comes over them, even though it's a bright cloud, it's not like a menacing dark cloud that was over Mount Sinai. But when you're in the presence of divine glory, it's got to be intimidating, you know. And so that's why the Bible keeps saying you cannot look upon God and live. In this case, they were looking on God in the flesh, and they lived. And they can, and that's all through the ministry of Jesus. He lets people climb into his lap, and he touches them, and they touch him. It's safe because this is the Savior. This is the Good Shepherd. Yeah. Any other questions on Elijah and Elisha?
Yeah, if no other questions, then.
I just have one
Okay.
thing to notice at the end, and that is they kept silent and told no one in those days what they had seen. In Matthew's gospel, it tells us Jesus instructed them not to say anything. So Luke, who may have written his account after Matthew, is saying, guess what? These guys listened to Jesus. He may have known that Jesus instructed him, but he doesn't feel the need to say that in his account. And Matthew tells us that that was the account of Jesus, or the advice of Jesus, or the command of Jesus, and they follow him, which is a kind of a neat little affirmation that they were trying to be good disciples, you know.
Yeah.
And they don't do it until after the resurrection of Jesus. So
When they're putting all the pieces of the puzzle together,
they're
and sharing it with everybody else experienced
having been given the Holy Spirit, that's what they're able to do. Yeah.
in hindsight. Well, with that, I think we will close this discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for sharing us. We wish you a good week, and we will see you again next time on Talking Sunday Readings.